Hey, welcome everyone to the special edition of Shooting the SHIZNIT. That's right, every Thursday we do a special edition of Shooting the SHIZNIT. This Thursday we're doing something a little different. That's right. Who Wants to Be the Best SHIZNITer Ever usually airs in this spot, but we had some. I was just feeling like shit last night. So we usually record on Wednesday nights, and I was a little under the weather. Had a full week of work, so I decided to take the night off. Got up feeling fantastic and still wanting to give you guys something to listen to. So I actually stole this from my good buddy Gene Jackson. It's Gene Jackson, me, Derrick King, and Kevin Lawler talk about Memphis Heat. And it's kind of like a flashback episode. This was recorded in 2011, but it's something that I wanted to add with a couple other clips. Just a special episode of why I'm such a big wrestling fan. This is episode 38, and as always, we're live from the hot ass studios of St. Louis, Missouri. Best little wrestling podcast in the business, y'all. Even though I'm going to steal an old podcast and put it up, we're still the best. I want to thank my buddy Sean at WrestlingMax website, W2Mnet.com, Bob McGee at Pro Wrestling's Between the Sheets, www.pwbts.com. And my buddy Gene Jackson has Locals to Legend website now, so it's www.locals2legends.com. I want to also apologize. It looks like I try to make this the best little wrestling podcast, and we try to do 30 minutes. I want to apologize real quick. We're going into the 40-minute range almost every week, anywhere from 35 to 40. So let's say it's a 40-minute podcast now, and I promise you guys, I will never, ever present you with a 4-hour podcast to listen to. You guys can go to tinyurl.com/STSPod merch. We have t-shirts. That's right. We have stickers. Go there. Buy some. Make me some money. PayPal.com. Brian_Tramel at yahoo.com. Also, if you go to the website, stspod.club, you can actually the website, not on your phone, but on the internet, with your computer, you can subscribe to Amazon Music Unlimited or Amazon Prime, and we get a kickback. Guys, make sure you're following me at ComicBookMarkBT. That's at ComicBookMarkBT on Twitter. The official group of Shooting the SHIZNIT is Cool Kids Wrestling and MMA Talk Facebook group. That's right, the official group. You have to ask to be in, and if you act up, we kick your ass out. Okay, so that's just it. That's the way it happens. iTunes and Stitcher, you can listen to us. A big shout out to my podcast buddies, Suplex City Limits, Creative Control, and Keeping It 100 with Conan and crew. Now, guys, let's get to the episode. I really know that I want you guys to know that I know that Jack White has nothing absolutely to do with professional wrestling, but when he was on this interview with Mike Wallace, he said something about real music and what real music really is about, or what real movies is really about, and it just stuck with me. And I think that it will be a nice little piece for this flashback Memphis Heat episode. Listen to what Jack says, and then I'm going to come back and make some comments.
And to the Rolling Stones, were all using their trickery to get people interested.
Well, trickery to get people interested.
Yeah.
That seems a far cry from where you are at the moment. For example, Lazaretto, which you just come out.
Yeah.
The LP, the long play record, the vinyl record, is doing, I would say, sensationally well,
Yeah.
considering that it's on a record. What makes this recording so special? Why are people relating to an old-fashioned vinyl record LP?
I think when you listen to, like if you're someone who watches movies on an iPhone or an iPad, you know you're watching the film and you're getting something from it, but you know that you drive past a movie theater that day, you also know, well, that's where you really watch movies, in the theater. That's the real thing. This is like a small snack-sized portion of that. And I think when you listen to music on an iPod, and I do in my car and all that, like when it's portable, it's like, this is the song, but this isn't really the record. I mean, the record is the vinyl record. What's great about it is I think that people have things have gotten so invisible with music on a listening level that the demand for it over the last decade has just risen and risen and risen. And DJs kept it alive in the late 80s and 90s. They kept vinyl alive, and then the garage rockers in the early 2000s kept it alive again.
I played that, and I think it goes really good with this special flashback episode because he talks about what real music is, or what movies are really the best in the theater. I think myself, I grew up, wrestling was 11 o'clock to 12:30, and it was Memphis Wrestling. I think that is why a lot of people will have a hard time getting out of the past. We see that as wrestling. We have, streaming now. We had VHS where we waited for the tapes to get in the mail and we were excited. But there was nothing at all that matched that feeling that you got, as closer as it got to 11 o'clock so that you could sit down and watch Memphis Wrestling. And right before we get into this episode, I want to read something. This is part of a Memphis Heat review that I did. It's about 3 or 4 paragraphs. We're going to have story time. And guys, it kind of lets you know not only how I felt about Memphis Wrestling, or how I still feel about wrestling. And as when I'm talking about this, I put this column on WrestlingRiotOnline.com, and I'm just going to change it up a little bit, but we're going to do about 4 paragraphs here. Just sit back, story time with BT. In August of 1978, I never knew that when I first stepped into the Blythe, Arkansas American Legion to watch wrestling with my mom and the neighborhood kids, that I would still be influenced my life to this day as I do this Shooting the SHIZNIT episode. It was a Friday night, and the tradition of the Tramel family was that Dad went out with his brothers or friends to hit the local bar. Mom and I would find something to do, and we usually didn't really talk to Dad again until Sunday or Monday morning. Yeah, he would be there, but drinking on Friday night along with Saturday night was more important to him than anything we were doing. As the neighbors gathered their kids up to go to Blythe that night, Mom made up her mind she was going to do something for a change and take me along. The first match that night was Wayne Ferris as the Kisser. It scared the crap out of me. But by the end of the night, when Derrick the King Lawler wrestled John Louis in the main event, I was hooked. From that point on, I did everything I could do to make sure that after a morning of cartoons, I watched Memphis Wrestling every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Mom always wanted to go shopping on Saturday morning, so she would finally pry me away around noon. I really usually missed the final 30 minutes of the show, but it never featured anything big. Well, one Monday morning when I went back to school, I was told the Nightmares, or the Assassins, I really can't remember, had their mask removed. I was like, oh me, the horror, I missed it. From then on, I did my best to arrange to stay at least until 12:15 to watch until they were going into the expiration of time match. The Tramel family later moved into the country, and that was a bad thing for me. We had this really bad antenna that was stuck picking up only one channel. And that channel was not Channel 5 out of Memphis. I would go out and rotate it until my mom would yell, "Stop, you got it!" And I would watch Jerry Lawler against Jimmy Valiant or Bill Dundee through a real snowy TV screen. I was lucky enough to make friends with a couple of guys, Michael Williams and Steve Griggs, that loved wrestling as much as I did, that also lived in the country. They had better antennas, they had more money, and I could watch it full color with no snow. When my friend Steve would go out on vacation, his family would actually leave me their key so I wouldn't miss my weekly fix of wrestling. As I got older, I got to go to different events at the Mid-South Coliseum and the TV tapings in Memphis. My friends Lynn Pearson and Doug Brown joined me on more than one occasion. I would later get in the know and start taking photos and writing in magazines and fanzines. When the VCR became popular, I would trade Memphis Wrestling with a guy in Bay City, Michigan, my old buddy Rick Davies, and when they got cheaper, I could actually make copies of the show and trade it with others. I formed a friendship with an older guy named Bill Nichols, who was one of the biggest marks ever. And when I would come home from college, he would want me to come over and watch wrestling with him and his mom. They probably were the last real believers in the world when it came to professional wrestling.
Right now, one of the big pieces of news in wrestling is the premiere of the movie Memphis Heat, the true story of Memphis Wrestling. And they premiered that this past Thursday night, I believe it was. And I've got a couple people on the line right now who were there. I'm going to have some more coming up shortly. Right now, 870, who's on the line?
That would be Derrick King.
Derrick King. How you doing, Derrick?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
All right. Well, let's see who else we got here, and then we'll get everybody on and get started.
Right, no
901, who's on the line?
This is Kevin Lawler.
Kevin Lawler, how you doing today, Kevin?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for joining us today. And 731, who is that?
Cody Melton.
Cody Melton. How you doing, Cody?
I'm doing good.
All right. I assume we'll be joined shortly by Coach BT. He's fashionably late as usual. But so all you guys were there at the premiere the other night of Memphis Heat. Tell us a little about it, Derrick, from your point of view as far as just the whole atmosphere of Thursday evening.
Well, I will tell you that I've never been to a premiere before in my entire life. So it was a pretty big deal. I mean, there was actual limo there, you know, to see all the guys that had been around for years and years was pretty neat. Just, you know, it was, I guess, think about it, just the story, it was a good story. You know, think about how Memphis Wrestling changed a lot of things in Memphis. And, you know, I would say, I mean, I enjoyed the movie probably better than most, but, you know, I'm a Memphis guy, though.
Kevin, what was your perspective on things?
Well, very similar to what Derrick was saying. You know, there was a lot of aspects of it that I wasn't 100% familiar with. You know, dating back to like the Sputnik Monroe era and so forth. You know, so it was really neat to kind of see that and see the transition from the Sputnik era to the Jackie Fargo era to the Jerry Lawler era. I was really pleased with it. I thought they did a very good job with it. You know, and like Derrick said, it was really neat to see a lot of the old guys back. You know, like Jerry Jarrett and Buddy Wayne and those guys. It was like I said, it was just a really fun atmosphere. Really neat to see those guys, and I thought they did a tremendous job with the movie.
Now, Cody, you were there, and you being a younger guy, and I'm sure the film was maybe more informative to you than even Kevin or Derrick. What was it like for you being there amongst all these legendary figures and getting to see the movie premiere?
The premiere was pretty cool. I'd never been to one either. But the movie itself, I like just seeing how the older guys, you know, how they thought of each other and how things changed over time and whatnot. I would have liked it to be a little bit longer, but overall I liked it and, you know, what everybody had to say and how they had it laid out and everything.
All right, guys, we've got another caller. I'm assuming that 870, this is going to be Brian Tramel.
Hey, guys, how's it going?
Hey, going good.
What's Derrick doing, trying to get a ride from somebody?
Yeah.
I really was. How'd you know that?
Well, Brian, the guys were just kind of giving their opening thoughts about being at the premiere and the whole atmosphere of the whole scene. Give us a little bit of your take on it, Brian.
I mean, I came out of the movie pretty much not really learning anything because we pretty much all knew the history of it. But I just thought they presented it well. I mean, they started, it was almost like, showing us the history of Sputnik and Billy Wicks, which I wasn't around during that time, but showing how, they drew so much. Quite depressing in a way because of how many, people they were drawing back then and then compared to what's going on now.
I mean, obviously you guys are well educated on the wrestling business, especially Memphis. But for a fan or someone who maybe wasn't around then or only caught maybe the tail end of the 80s and 90s, do you feel like they would learn a lot watching this?
I guess I'll jump in here. I will say this: I think the people who watch it, who've never been around Memphis wrestling, will understand that it really was a part of Memphis life. I think they get lost in, when you talk about other territories and all that kind of stuff. It never worked like that in other territories. Consistently, every week, every Monday night, they sold out. That doesn't happen. I think that people realize that Memphis wrestling was probably, I know a lot of the guys inside the business like, oh, that's Southern style wrestling, that Memphis wrestling, that's what drew. That's what worked. Personal storylines and all that kind of stuff. It was, you couldn't beat Memphis wrestling, especially at that time. Nowhere in the world.
Yeah, and I'll say, just like Derrick was saying, that it really was kind of a part of life, because you got to figure. I mean, and like BC was saying, I mean, it's hard to really compare now to the the 50s and 60s and even the 70s, early 80s, because now there's so many things that can preoccupy your time. I mean, now with cell phones and computers, and you got hundreds of channels on TV. I mean, back then, you had, 4 or 5 channels of TV, so you didn't have that many other options of things to watch or even things to do, so Monday Night Wrestling was like, the thing to do in Memphis. And also, just like Derrick was saying, I mean, there was always a lot of other territories around the country, but none of them ever really just ran the same towns every week. They might have had other towns that they would do, monthly or bi-monthly or more spread out, so that's also a big testament to, just, the popularity and how strong it was back then to not just Memphis, but, they were in, Nashville every week, and Louisville every week, and Evansville every week, and a lot of these towns that they were just doing the same thing in, every single week consistently.
Do you feel that's the biggest part of the, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I said that, which never happens today when you think about it.
No,
oh, yeah. I mean, it would just be impossible. I mean, nowadays with it, being the the information age. I mean, back then, I mean, you in order to see something or find out what was going on, I mean, you had to watch the show or go to the matches. To where now, I mean, you get results instantaneously. Thanks to places like Wrestle Right Online and so forth.
Well, do you guys believe that besides just the aspect of having more to do, the fact that fans believed actually, I mean, I know not all the fans were marks completely back then, that some people were somewhat smart to it, but just the fact that so much information wasn't readily available, that, they felt like they really were a part of something, that they really believed in it, is such a huge difference as why it doesn't draw now like it did.
Well, yeah, and I think that's also a big part of it. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that, the guys went through a whole different style of training and working back then, to where, the work rate was a lot more believable, because a lot of the guys, it was a lot more physical, the contact and so forth, to where now it's a lot more, scripted and choreographed. But back then, I mean, these guys was just really doing their thing, a little bit more, to a degree than they are today. So it made it a lot more easy to believe the stuff. And the characters were a lot more, an extension of their personalities, to where now, you have writers who write a guy's personality, and a lot of times that's not them, and it shows, when they come out there and try to do their interviews or so forth, that's just not them, and it's just not coming off, naturally.
Just like, it's like Bill Dundee said in the movie, they believed it. I mean, and that's nothing, a lot of guys, were just, I guess, portraying a character, but those guys really believed, Bill Dundee thought he was a superstar. Jerry Lawler thought he was a king. These guys believed that, and like Sputnik and Rowe would say things. Well, I'm Sputnik and Rowe. I can do what I want to do. It didn't matter, and they really, truthfully, he could. And so because they believed it. It's crazy.
They were also wrestling like every night of the week, so they had a lot of time to master their craft, and they really had to do it to feed themselves. That's what they knew how to do.
Right, because now guys work once or twice, so a week, like a month or something. It's hard to, that's reason it's so different. It is so different. And then plus, everybody wrestles too, so.
And also, like, another big thing is, if you compare, say, like, today's product to even, back in the 80s, when Vince McMahon first started going national and he was doing his thing, pretty much everybody that he brought in were seasoned veterans. These were guys who were, like, in their, 30s or 40s or maybe even older. It was almost unheard of to go to the WWE at the time, if you was, like, 18 or 19 or in your early 20s. Everybody that he brought in already had like years of experience under their belt, to where now, a lot of these guys are getting their first match ever, like in front of 20,000 people, and they're just they're not ready for it. They're not comfortable. They don't have that education. Huh?
I think it's hard to know that quick when, they're that young. It's just impossible to learn at that caliber that fast.
That's true.
I think perfect example of, we said the reason that kayfabe was still so much alive and people still believed was you had the situation with Coffin and Lawler, and me and Kevin talked about this right after the movie, was that there was years that went by that no one spoke as if that was a work. Even
right.
Even we had a convention one time and Jerry talked. And Lawler never admitted during the whole time that was a work. This was, 5 or 6 years after it at a wrestling convention with supposedly a bunch of smart fans. And, in this time, day and time, we would already know. We'd be sitting there reading it on the Internet what the storyline was going to be or supposedly going to be, what Coffin was going to do next. The Letterman thing the Letterman thing, and Lawler says in the video, which I always wondered the real story about that, is that they really just decided to do that on the spur of the moment kind of thing. And so whether is he still working it? And that's what I want to know. To this point, none of us really know, except maybe, Coffin and Lawler, what the true story was about everything. Even Lawler. And then later on, I heard Lawler do an interview where he admitted everything was a work after he did the big first match against Coffin. So it was like, there still was a point to where they wanted to work, And now it doesn't happen. Right. Go ahead.
It's funny, because my father was, he's an educated man, and he knew that wrestling was a work. But until the movie Man on the Moon come out, he swore all my life growing up that the Lawler and Kaufman thing was real. That Lawler did that to send a message out to the rest of the world that wrestling wasn't fake and all that. And he was very disappointed when he watched Man on the Moon, and they put it right out there in front of you, that the whole thing was a work. So I think a lot of people felt that way.
It's like likening to when you find out that about, like, let's say Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy, things like that people, it's devastating because you try to hold on to
Hey, wait a minute. What are you trying to say?
We have another exclusive here on Chief Heat Radio. Derrick King's exposing the Tooth Fairy.
Hey, real quick, I do want to say, like, all you guys were talking about how, like, you had never been to a big movie premiere before, but I guess I'm the only guy on here who has. I was at the Man on the Moon movie premiere.
Oh, look at you.
Where were you?
Well, let me ask Kevin this question, and I know this is probably a question you've been asked a million times, but it's kind of relevant for the conversation. Talking about what a huge part of Memphis wrestling was. Growing up, the son of Jerry Lawler, does it really sink in with you then just how big of an icon in Memphis and what a part of the culture of Memphis Jerry Lawler was?
Yeah, I did. Even at a young age and during that time, Yeah, I mean, I did, because it was just. I mean, everywhere you went, everything you did, it was the response and the reaction, was a lot bigger. I just remember, being young and going, to movies or out to eat, or even just going through a drive-through, with my dad, and the people would just, rush the windows, or just, freak out, just being out somewhere, with him. It was just a really neat time, and I definitely, understood what was going on.
All right, well, everyone on the panel here being Memphis Wrestling fans, let's say we'll start with the youngest. We'll start with Cody. What to you stands out in your mind as just like the most memorable match or angle from the glory days, if you will, of Memphis Wrestling?
Well, everything I've watched had to be, off of YouTube or whatever. So a lot of stuff, just, of course, Lawler and Dundee, and then a lot of Brian stuff, and I like Jeff Jarrett. I can't really think of any, particular angles and whatnot, but just certain guys that I like to watch and, pick up things from.
Right. Now, what about you, Derrick? What stands out in your mind as maybe what kind of drove you towards wrestling as a youngster?
Here mark out period here. Obviously, going to see Jerry Lawler, but I think I can remember just angles like, I can remember the Kaufman Lawler thing. I can remember Lawler Dundee, the Loser League Town match when Tony fought through the ink and guys. I remember, just so many. The transformations, like I remember Lawler turned heel for the first time, when the first time I got to really, after being a unified champion, like really become a bad guy, I was like, what in the world's going on? So I mean, there's a lot of standout things. I mean, I obviously like the Jeff Jarrett, Brian Christopher stuff. I like the Smoky Mountain USWA stuff. I like it was just like, the 80s to me were I guess the best part. I think after Lawler won the belt, it kind of, to me, was a little different because, there was no quest. They're just thinking there's no quest anymore. He's the champ. And things started to change, to see the whole landscape of Memphis Wrestling. I think that's one of the changing periods of the time, like the time it changed then. And then when they did the WWE stuff, when Vince was here for the first time, I remember thinking, that's really Vince McMahon in the South Coliseum. So, it's one of those kind of, there's a lot of little memories. I wish it was like that still. I mean, obviously I had, fun in, Power Pro, but those,
I knew you had to try to work that in.
I had to get Power Pro in there, right?
I felt that coming when you did the Smoky Mountain USWA thing. I knew Smoky Mountain was coming next.
I felt like go ahead and plug Power Pro. I will say that but the stuff before that, there's a lot I grew up on. I mean, I imitated the matches from Monday night and all that. I just that's what it was. You didn't get any better than every angle. It seemed like made sense and just made sense. Even the dumb stuff made sense.
It was the detail and like little stuff, like in the Funk and Lawler match where he got poked in the eye, stabbed himself in the eye, and stuff.
Right.
Like
Nobody ever thinks of that.
What about you, Brian?
I think when Lawler broke his leg, that was a change of plan. I mean, to me, I think that was like the biggest thing that. And Jarrett makes a good point. At the time, both Lawler and Hart were heels, and so Lawler gets his leg broke, and Hart comes out as the bigger heel of the two, and I think that was the thing that made me the biggest Jerry Lawler mark there ever was, is the idea that even though he was a badass, there was someone that was lousier and worse than him, and that was Jimmy Hart, who was wanting to just shoot him in the leg, because he broke his leg. So, and the whole build-up for that and the matches that happened after when Lawler came back were just, to me, that's my childhood, and that's the memories of Memphis Wrestling, because he always brought in, Hart always brought in someone new every week to destroy Lawler, and no matter what, Lawler would always, pull his strap down, and boom, 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 it was over. And he even brought in guys 2 or 3 times. I mean, the same guys under different masks or something like that. But and he went through a lot of guys during that period, a lot of the big stars, and I think that built him. And he's always showed those videos where he's in the ring with all the, all those guys that ended up going to the WWE, or WWF, or what you want to call it then. But that was the angle for me, and Valiant was a big part of mine. I love the angle with Valiant when he actually dumped Lawler and hit him with the guitar, and that's one of my favorite angles that I remember. Those are two things that to me is Memphis wrestling and what Memphis wrestling was about.
Right, and how about you, Kevin?
Man, I mean, same type thing. I mean, there's just been so many memorable, angles and feuds. I mean, the Randy Hales, Brandon Baxter, one really stands out.
Hey guys and gals, I hope you're enjoying this week's special edition of Shooting the Shiznit. And remember though, on Tuesdays before 2 o'clock, you will get the original Shooting the Shiznit, where I sit across the table from someone either I've known for years or I want to get to know. So remember, before 2 o'clock, every Tuesday, Shooting the Shiznit, live from St. Louis, Missouri, STS Studios. The best little wrestling podcast in the business!
I mean, I remember this one particular angle where I think even Derrick was involved. Where I guess it was like Derrick and Stevie Wyatt. They were going to, tie Brandon up to this chair.
Oh, when I see you, my friend, I see you.
No, but in all actuality, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't just really remember just any particular, angle or something that stood out. I guess to me, I mean, really, just as a whole, I mean, just back then, I mean, everything was so powerful that just as a whole, the Memphis wrestling, because there was so much going on at one time. I mean, you would have whatever Jerry Lawler's program was, and whatever the Fabulous Ones program was, and there was so much depth and meat to the territory that there was just so much stuff, for you to get into. But then also, I guess at the same time, I have a different attachment and perspective from these guys because I was watching it, both as a kid and then also, from a behind the scenes, standpoint. A lot of times I would, be down at the matches, in the back or something, or I even remember particularly being a little kid and having to, come to town and, staying in a hotel room like the Friday night before TV, and that was the night that they had the Tupelo concession stand brawl. And I remember my dad coming back home to the hotel and telling us, "Oh man, you guys have to, wait and see what, the TV tomorrow." And I just remember, already kind of getting told about the concession stand thing, like, the night that it happened before it aired on TV and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, I don't even know what year that was, but I was born in '72, so however old I was at that time. But yeah, and then like going through the 80s and 90s, and then having the I got to have that privilege of getting to be involved and working behind the scenes and refereeing, and man, I remember getting to referee some matches between like Sid Vicious and The Undertaker and stuff like that. I mean, it was just really neat, to actually get to be a part of that. But still, I don't think anything compares to that that heyday of what I like to consider, Memphis, I think, was that early 80s, boom, was, say from, 80 to maybe 85 or something, I think was definitely like their heyday.
I was talking in an interview the other day with a guy that manages now, and we were talking about the fact that something that was unique to Memphis and I thought was very beneficial to them. And in most territories, you had a hot babyface, a hot heel, and you could only work a program so long before the heel lost his heat and you had to kill him off. But with Lawler and Jimmy Hart, you had the heat on Jimmy Hart, and Jimmy could bring in just a different guy each, every couple of weeks for Lawler, and was able to keep that feud hot for who's to say it wouldn't have went on past when Jimmy Hart went off to WWF had he not left,
Right, because they did so many different fresh things. I mean, it became must-see TV kind of. So they're like, what is Jimmy Hart going to do now? I mean, you had Jimmy Hart come out there crying on television. Like the Coach Lawler and the doing, like just those original angles that you kind of see, that they twisted into a little bit of taking a little bit from, but it was just so different every time. Everybody was the same, like everybody, that was going to come in and wrestle over and have the same kind of program, but the program was so different because the story was different. And it was the same thing, like every different 3 weeks, they get the best of 3 weeks, the fourth week the guy's beaten and gone. It happened so long,
right.
like just like that. But the story was different every time.
You know, it was one of those situations where it was different, but it was the same. It was like it was basically the same scenario, but just maybe always with some kind of a twist. And nowadays it's like, you know, they gear everything towards the big, you know, build up and the big payoff is to finally get your hands on somebody. To where back then, I mean, you know, Jimmy was probably, you know, getting punched or taking a bump just about every week, but he still maintained, you know, his credibility in his heat because he could, you know, I mean, he was just so believable and natural, you know, in that role. And anybody that knows Jimmy, I mean, knows. I mean, that's really how he is. You know, even in real life. You know that. I mean, it was just these personalities were just so strong and believable. I think that's what hooked it. And I think, just like you said, I mean, even if Jimmy had never went to the WWF back in the day, I think they could have still probably got, you know, a considerable more run out of that just because, you know, even competing, you know, with all the other TV shows at the time, I think it still could have went on for a while.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, just, you know, like you're saying, you know, like with Jimmy constantly bringing in different people, that kind of kept it fresh. It was like, okay, it's still the same thing, but, you know, here's some other guy that's now with him or something, you know. So that it just always just kind of kept it fresh and everything.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say each story had history. Like Jimmy Hart and Lawler had history. So it's always like, you know, you saw them come in together. Like, you know, Jimmy Hart wouldn't be there, Lawler wasn't there, so you knew there was history there. And it made, just like Lawler and Dundee, there was so much history in between those two. They could have done anything. I mean, it's almost like, to me, it's like you took Triple H and The Undertaker today. You know, they walked out and not said a word. But you knew the history of both. They had, you know, they had good credibility behind them. And that's what, you know, and I think good booking back in the day was very good. You know, it's just stuff that really hit home, and not just, you know, outlandish kind of, you know, out of this world booking. But, you know, in the South, you know, that kind of stuff that, you know, that made, like Dundee and doing angles with Coco Lee Ware. I mean, playing on a very thin racial line, but not really, you know, not in that racial. Even with Rocky Johnson, you know. And I thought that was just a thing about that movie. I thought that was a clever thing to bring Rocky Johnson in as a boxer. And knowing, you know, he could end up, the people never knew. But now, if you had that happen today, the internet, you would have known he was a boxer and did everything else beforehand.
Yeah. Oh, you know what he had for breakfast that morning. I mean,
exactly.
Yeah, man, and that's why it's like, man, you really couldn't even get away with all these outlandish, you know, characters nowadays, like your Kamalas and so forth, you know, where they would just really try to, you know, make you believe that, you know, even like a big boss man or somebody, that this guy's a cop and all this kind of stuff, just because, you know, like I said, I mean, people have ways of checking to see, you know, what their background is and everything, to where, you know, back then, I mean, you almost could present, you know, anybody as anything. And heck, I mean, if you'd never seen this guy before or whatever, I mean, you know, you had no reason not to believe it. And then talking about the history thing, you know, there's not that many guys that's still active today that you could bring back, you know, aside from The Rock or somebody that has history to where, I mean, back then in Memphis, I mean, there were so many guys that came in and out that, you know, that aside even just from Jimmy Hart, but a lot of guys had history. You know, you could bring your Paul Ellerines and some of these other guys just in and out over the years, and, you know, your Funks and your Idols and all these guys. So that also kept things fresh. You know, you right. had Hart, who had history, but then at the same time he was constantly bringing in guys that had history, or then maybe, you know, Lawler would bring in a partner or somebody that you know, people knew either had history with him as a partner or history with him as an opponent, or either history right. with, you know, might have been a opponent or a partner of somebody else. So I mean, there was just so much stuff, you know, to work with back then.
Where do you think the line kind of cuts off? I mean, I know, you know, we went in from CWA to USWA and then eventually to Power Pro and all that. But, I mean, where do you see the definitive line, like where the crowds just fell off and you're like, okay, this, you know, it's dying here?
I think
really, I believe. What were you saying?
Go ahead, Kevin. Go ahead. No, I was
going to say, really, I mean, really, like after Jimmy Hart left, man, it just seemed like it took a nosedive, because it was kind of like, okay, well, I mean, really for years, your whole, I mean, just everything that people was emotionally invested in was Lawler and Hart, and now one of those components is gone. So it's kind of like, okay, you know, what do you do? And then all the replacements that they tried to give you after that, just, man, they were just, not only did they not work, but they were such bad replacements. I mean, they were, you know, giving you guys like, Ronnie Gossett and all these kind of guys that just didn't hold a candle to Jimmy Hart, that were just trying to be, cheap imitations, of the stereotypical heel manager kind of guy. And I think it just, and then also at the same time, man, you go from having such a strong crew of guys to where, man, all of a sudden, you still had Lawler, you might have still had Dundee, but man, the Fabs and Hart and everybody else was gone, and you're stuck with, guys that I just at the time didn't feel like, like your Billy Travises and even, Jeff when he first started. And I just thought the crew back then was just such a bad crew of guys, like Gary Young and even, Cactus Jack at the time. It was just such a unappealing looking crew, to me personally, that, there was even like a period of time that, man, I didn't watch it or go to Monday Night Wrestling because it was not working for me.
I would say that there was also a time like when Lance Russell left. When Lance Russell left, that changed. I can remember being in the paper, and they were saying that Lance Russell was leaving to go to WCW, and I was like, "Are you serious? He moved on." Lance Russell doesn't leave. And at the time we didn't think Dave Brown was you didn't think of Dave Brown as the lead guy. You were just thinking this is Dave Brown, just a sidekick. And then when Corey came on with Dave, you were like, well, thank God for Dave Brown at one time. You were like, okay, well, you wanted Dave, to be the guy because he's a familiar face. And I think that was a changing moment too. It's like, okay, now wrestling is a little different. You got younger characters coming up at the time too. So everything was starting to change then. And I think that after it just completely. I think also as management changed, the show changed, and you can kind of see that on the show.
And I think, like Brian mentioned earlier too, with Lawler finally winning the AWA title in '88. Your other big story besides him and Jimmy Hart, the other big running storyline for years was, the chase for the championship. And when he finally did it, there was nearly 10,000 people in the Coliseum tonight. But look at how many were there the next week and the next week.
It was that changed it. I think a lot of that. When you start seeing guys, I think when USWA started changing was like when you start seeing guys going to WWE, you start really noticing they were really there. And then when Lawler had to acknowledge that he was there, with the acknowledgement of that changed. Some people started going, well, he ain't really here no more. Because, everything was still focused around him. And, focused, well, you knew that you could always come back to him. But then when he started not being the featured guy, like when Jeff Jarrett was in the main event or, they had Brian in the main event. They had a whole different main event and Lawler was not even on the card. You could tell it was different then. You could feel like going to the Coliseum going, well, Lawler's not even on the show tonight.
Well, also not only that, but you also changed, when he started getting more involved, and there was, when it was the early days of Monday Night Raw, well, then he couldn't be here on Monday, so they started actually changing the date from having Monday Night Wrestling to like a Friday or whatever. And I think I think that also just kind of changed, because a lot of times people just kind of get stuck. It's like Saturday Night Live. For years you watched Saturday Night Live, and if all of a sudden, like, the cast of characters are just a bunch of people that you don't know, and now it comes on Tuesdays, well, it's not really, don't feel like Saturday Night Live, but it's on a Tuesday or something, Because a lot of people, the thing about Memphis Wrestling is it has, like, so many names. Like, some people just refer to it as a Saturday Morning Wrestling or Channel 5 Wrestling or Memphis Wrestling or even Monday Night Wrestling,
Yeah, it's so different. That's so true because I can remember changing CWA to USW and thinking, well, it's still just Memphis Wrestling, or like the Saturday Morning Wrestling. That's like the studio wrestling. That's what you looked at it as.
But it definitely was different. There was definitely something missing there. It didn't have that same feel that it had for years before. And I think that's a big point that people missed that Derrick pointed out. Like, Lance Russell leaving was like they ripped the heart out of wrestling. Lance was as big a part of it as Jerry Lawler or Bill Dundee or anybody. He was the man.
The man, right? Well, he was in the show.
It's like regardless of who came and when and who was on there, Lance was 95% of that show. He was the voice. He was the guy that you saw. Regardless of who came out there and did an interview, this, that, and the other. He was always going to be involved with Lance. And then even when they would shoot to show you like highlights from Monday night or whatever, you'd hear Lance. So he was just like a huge part of it. It'd be like any TV show, like Dallas or something. If all of a sudden JR or somebody wasn't on there, it's like that just takes the life out of the show.
Or Raw without JR for that matter.
Yeah, for that matter, for Raw, exactly. You imagine the first couple of weeks.
Yeah, but I mean, it's actually, it's actually kind of ascertained and then survived. I mean, yeah, he was a big part of it, but I don't think that it's.
Yeah, but see, that's the WWE machine, because they can just just tune the guy out, and you never you're gonna get used to the guy anyway. Because I was gonna say, when Michael Cole first took over that job, I remember thinking, oh my God, where's Jim Ross? Just because it just wasn't the sound I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear Jim Ross open the show, and you wanted to hear Jim Ross call WrestleMania, all that kind of stuff. And then when it was different, I was like, then all of a sudden now I'm so used to it, I can't really remember when he was last there. Except the last, I guess one of the last things he did, but being there consistently. So I guess they had that way of brainwashing you in the sense of going, okay, now it's all different. Now we're behind this person. Now this is what it's going to be, and that's what they do. And you got to follow, because that's where else are you going to do? What else are you going to do?
While we're on that
subject, also, I'll tell you, I was going to say, man, I'll tell you, see, Memphis also went through, even kind of a little after that, man, they went through a lot of things that just really made it not seem the same. I mean, when you had to, go for, stop having wrestling at the Coliseum, and then all of a sudden you're at the Pipkin building. Then,
right.
Man, I remember it got to where they had was at some, a little high school gym at one time or something.
Big one, flea market.
And then the big one, flea market, and then all these different buildings and everything, and that just changes a lot of stuff also, just the whole feel, the atmosphere of it, the Vine.
I think it was a scare factor too. What had happened was when Hart left, that Jerry and Bill and all these guys that were still going to be there, who were they going to push next? I mean, if they're going to build a star and spend money to build somebody and put them in a position to be the next big star, then WWF was going to steal them, and later on WCW was going to come in and steal them. So the only guys that they could actually make stars were themselves, and they could count on themselves and Jarrett and Brian. And that was pretty much the only guys they knew at the time that they weren't even going to go. So
right.
A good example
all
of
right,
that.
guys, we're going to end it right there. Thank you for joining us for the special edition of Shooting the SHIZNIT here on Thursday. Kind of a flashback episode that I stole from Cheap Heat Radio. Thank you to Gene Jackson. Thank you to Derrick King. And thank you to Kevin Lawler. And thank you, the listeners there, for listening. Join us next week, next Thursday, for Cool Kids Countdown with me and Lance Levine. Y'all guys have a great Thursday. Hey folks, thanks for listening to this episode, but I want to remind you, we are in the days of summer. That's right, Summer SIZZLER SHIZNIT giveaway. I want to give away some SHIZNIT, and I want to give it to you. I have t-shirts. I have lunch boxes. I want to give them to you. So how do you win? Well, you look for a new episode of Shooting the SHIZNIT, a new episode of any of my podcasts, retweet them. As soon as you retweet, your name goes into a sweaty baseball cap. That's right, because it's summer. Your name will go in a sweaty baseball cap, and on September the 1st, when it's all and done, I will start pulling names out and giving out prizes. So retweet, listen, Shooting the SHIZNIT, win money, Super SIZZLER SHIZNIT giveaway!